Hello class, my name is Samir,
I'm Kai.
David. I'm Jackson.
and this is our slideshow about components in Bootstrap. First, we're going to talk about forms. So, first of all, just a quick intro. A form is, as I'm sure all of you know, an easy way to get user input in a website. And what Bootstrap does is it offers revamped form styles, which are more aesthetic and also more consistent across different browsers. So as you can see here, this is a simple HTML form, and then this is that same form implemented in Bootstrap. So yeah, I think it looks quite a bit better in Bootstrap. So text input are probably the easiest and simplest way to get user input. So class equals form label labels the form element that you're working with. And then within the input tag, make sure to change the type attribute to ensure that Bootstrap features such as email verification or numerical checking are implemented correctly. And then within the password help block ID, you can actually, give the form element a description. So in this case, it's just telling you how long the password needs to be. Adding the class form control to an input allows certain properties of that input to be controlled and set. So for example, we can change the sizing of a text input here using LG and SM. The LG is obviously larger and the SM is obviously smaller. We can also use the disable end tag at the end here in order to disable an element, which means that it's not interactable. The user can't click on it and nothing like that. We can also use type equals file to allow for file upload. And then we can use ID values such as these here in order to change the size and again the type of form inputs. So we're on to our first question. Which of these tags prevent the user from clicking on a certain form element? Is it A, unclickable, B, disabled, C, view only, or D, immutable? The correct answer is B, disabled. Next, to create a kind of a select option, I use a select tag with class equals form select, which basically enables the Bootstrap styles on top of the default HTML element. And you use the option tag to create your various values. And you can use LG and SM, and the difference between which is shown here, in order to change the size of the select form. So very similar to text input. Next, we have checkboxes, radio, and switches. So these are kind of your multiple choice inputs. So class equals form check is what enables the Bootstrap styles for all three of these. Class equals form check input is what actually tells the specific values, and form check label is for the label of the value. So for checkboxes, you use type equals checkbox. For radio, that's going to be type equals radio. And for a switch, it's a little different. We go back to type equals checkbox, but then we add a new attribute called role, which has to be set to switch.
Now we're going to talk about range forms. Ranges are created by adding the form range class to an input tag. The default min and max values are 0 to 100, but they can be specified with the min and max attributes. The default step value causes the range to snap to integers, but the step value can be redefined to any amount, including a fractional or decimal one. This is an example of input groups. So you see here that there are user input fields grouped together with these little gray add-ons. Bootstrap allows for the creation of these kinds of input groups by adding the input group class to a div. So text add-ons can be placed in an input field by creating span tags with the class input group text. So that would be just like these add-ons in the second examples. Input features such as radio buttons and checkboxes can also be added to an add-on with the div tag input group text. Buttons and dropdowns can be added to an input group as well. but there will be more on making buttons and drop-downs later. Like many Bootstrap classes, adding a dash and a size abbreviation to the input group class, such as -sm, will change the size of the input group. For the user input section of the input group, text input elements or select elements can be used. Multiple add-ons can be used in one input group, and they can be placed on either side of the input field. Now for floating labels. Floating labels look like this excellent example display of floating labels from the Geeks for Geeks website. Input and label pairs can be placed inside of a div with the form floating class to make the labels float over the inputs just like so. The inputs should always be before the label tags, and the inputs should include a placeholder attribute. Selects can be used in place of inputs here, and each input and label pair should have its own form floating div. Add the needs validation class to any form element that you want to be required before submitting. You can add text to a div with the class valid feedback or invalid feedback to create a message to display for those scenarios, just like these down here. If a range form has the attributes min0 and max6 in step 1/2, how many possible states does the range have? The correct answer is 12. Which of the following are true statements regarding input groups? Add-ons cannot contain solely text, drop-downs can be added to input groups, or select elements can be used as the user input for an input group. The correct answers are that drop-downs can be added to input groups and select elements can be used as the user input.
Okay, now I'm going to talk about buttons. Bootstrap has a default button class of btn with basic styles like padding. These default buttons also have a transparent border and background color, but when clicked, the border becomes black. Always try to specify a type attribute for a button, as the default type is submit. Here's what the base button looks like. Bootstrap has many different variants for buttons set with classes, such as button primary and button light. While the button class was designed to be used with button tags, it can also be used with other tags, such as A's for links and inputs of various types, as seen here. Buttons can be outlined with classes such as button outline primary and button outline danger. Button sizes can also be changed with button small and button large. Buttons can be made to look inactive, just like forms, with the disabled attribute placed in the button tag. And here's our question on buttons. How would you create a small button with a dark outline that looks inactive? The correct answer is B.
So, what is a dropdown? Dropdowns are contextual overlays to display links, options, and lists. So basically, when you click a button or like some section, a menu will appear and then it'll have like a bunch of options to click. So to do this to create a dropdown in HTML, you would use the select tag. However, in Bootstrap, button dropdowns are created with a button tag. So here's a deep dive into creating the dropdown. So first, you need to create the button. As you can see, top left, class equals button and button primary. As Kai said, this is just to like create a button that looks good. And then the arrow on the right is created with the drop-down -toggle option. But it's not really necessary if you don't want it. Then the really important part is the data bs toggle equals dropdown. This is the thing that allows the menu to actually appear when the user clicks the button. And then normally in Bootstrap, We use unordered lists to list all the actions that the user can click. However, this is not necessarily always the case, and there are other options. What allows the dropdown to appear on click? So the correct answer is A. This is what allows the dropdown to appear on click. B is to make the button look good. C is for the actual actions in the menu. And D is, I don't even know what D is. Okay, so here's some cool stuff you can do with dropdowns in Bootstrap. So one is you can add a separator line in the menu. This is done with you create a list element in an H rule and give it the class dropdown divider. And if you look on the right, you'll see that the options are separated by a pretty clear line. Another cool thing you can do is you can make the menu dark. You just add dropdown menu dark in the list class, in the list element. Okay, and another cool thing is you can change in the div class that contains the button in the list. You can give it the class drop up, drop in, drop start, or drop down, and then each will cause the menu to appear in some sort of orientation, based on the class. However, if there's no room for the menu to appear with like whatever class you're naming it, it'll appear on the other side. So like if on the right side I had used drop start, the menu would appear on the right side rather than the left because there's no room on the left side for the menu to appear. So lastly, dropdown events. There are 4 main events for Bootstrap dropdowns: show, shown, hide, and hidden. When you're doing it in JavaScript or jQuery, you need to create some variable to point to the div class that contains the button in the list. And then, so the show event will be called whenever the user initially clicks the button to show the dropdown. The shown event will be called when the menu is completely loaded on the user's end. The hide is just the vice versa of show, and hidden is the vice versa of shown. Which event is fired when the dropdown is fully shown? So the correct answer is B.
That's the end of the presentation. We hope you learned a little bit about components in Bootstrap. Thank you for watching.
I love buttons and Bootstrap.
I love forms and Bootstrap.
He dropped it down in Bootstrap.
Yeah.
I love to boogie.
In Bootstrap.